Part 5. After being subjected to a lengthy lecture regarding how the Holmes house was arranged and seeing its blueprints, I was taken on a tour of all the secret passageways, which I had not been made aware of before that moment. Wells had begun to despair at ever escaping the unending explanations, while I, who would have been interested had I not been distracted by other thoughts, simply took out my diary and made notes on what was said. I have been blessed with the gift of being able to take down a man's words exactly while being unable to recite any of what he said from memory. Although at times I see this as an insurmountable curse, I can form memories of what is being said on occasion with no small effort. In this case I found such exertion wholly unnecessary. Holmes glanced down at my journal and raised a brow. "You do realize that this is confidential information, Watson?" I simply held the thing out to him, and he squinted at it. "I am not familiar with this cipher." Shaking my head, I sighed. "It's not a cipher, it's a writing style that my friend and I came up with in college. We had issues with people stealing our notes, so naturally we started writing in such a way that people would be unable to read what we wrote." Wells grinned. "Deliberately illegible handwriting, that's—" He paused when Holmes handed him the journal. "What in hell?" Holmes stared at me. "You don't write all of your notes this way." I shook my head. "Just those that I deem confidential." Jonathan had turned the book upside down in confused silence, at which Holmes smiled. "I don't think Dr. Watson's journal is in any danger of being read any time soon. Do you, Jonathan?" Jonathan, thoroughly confused, just handed me back the tome. We then went down to breakfast. Later that morning I received a call from Sergeant Birch and his brother, the latter being very pleased to see me. I found this exceptionally gratifying, as it is rare for a surgeon to receive thanks from those they worked on in the field. This young man thanked me and more, his bright eyes shining. It wasn't a long visit, but it had done wonders for my mood. After all, my patient was alive and healthy. What doctor can ask for more than that? I was settling in, feeling pleased with myself, when Holmes rushed in. "On with your coat, Watson. We have an interview to conduct." Tired out by my own social interview, I tried to protest, but Holmes insisted, as it was an interview with the woman who ran the boarding house Drebber had stayed in, at which I would be useful. So tired and suddenly annoyed, I followed him out. Holmes seemed excited as we rushed along. I am certain that many would find it odd that he obtained pleasure from a situation so gruesome, but I had seen as many soldiers love the violence of war as those that were frightened by it, and was no longer caught off guard. The male mind is one which a woman such as myself cannot fully comprehend, as close as I may come. When I asked Holmes why he insisted that I accompany him to this house, as being useful wasn't enough information for me, his answer left me disgruntled. "Watson, I find women to be wild creatures whose movements are difficult to predict and opinions hard to sway. While I am more than capable of assuaging their concerns when talking to the police, I have found it far more efficient to have them speak to one of their own kind." This statement left me frowning and confused. "You can't possibly expect me to be the one to do the questioning." He paused his step and glanced down at me. "Hardly." "Then how does your statement stand?" He shook his head like a parent frustrated that a child was not understanding the concept. "Well, I do expect you are quite capable of questioning a witness, dear doctor. I do suppose I should have clarified that in this case having you nearby should make the women in question more comfortable, if only out of pity for your current state." This last part was tacked on as I raised my brow, and caused me to glance down at my weakened, limping body. "I see." It really didn't bother me that he was using me for convenience. I was actually glad to know, so I could better play my part. "You could have clarified that back at the house. I do like to be useful, and knowing is far better than being in the dark." He patronizingly patted my arm. "I was under the impression that you were quite capable of deducing what was going on through context. For now, though, I will attempt to be more forthcoming." A thought came to mind, and I decided to voice it. "What is your plan if these women don't find me to be a pitiable personage?" "In the very unlikely event that a person who looks upon you does not find your current state to be disarming and lamentable, you are still far more qualified than I to slip into the good graces of the fair sex. as well as navigating that verbal espionage in which your gender is so often engaged. Confusion crossed my face as I took in what he said. Verbal espionage? Gossip and social control, Watson. You must have experienced it in your life. Women are quite adept at the exchange of information and slaughter of their enemies through words alone. I would prefer the company of women exclusively for that reason, if it were not for the fact that so many get distracted by nonsense and enjoy meddling in the affairs of others. I suddenly understood what he was talking about. Gossip could indeed be a problem, and there were many women back home who could destroy a reputation if they let loose all of the information in their possession. I understand what you mean by gossip, but what is the nonsense you mentioned? Do you mean things like fashion? His neck whipped to look at me so fast I feared he would injure himself. Bite your tongue, Watson. I understand that as a medical student you are likely too busy to concern yourself with current fashion, but I will not hear such an important and essential aspect of life slandered. I raised my hand in surrender. Sorry, I just don't understand what you consider to be nonsense. He let out a heavy sigh. I will give you an example. When a woman decides that a bachelor cannot possibly be happy with his current state of being, and takes it upon herself to marry off her sister or daughter to said bachelor in spite of all protest, including his. I covered my mouth to prevent a giggle. I had seen that harried look before when an older gentleman had made the mistake of moving into my family's small town as an unmarried man. I take you speak from experience, then? Disgust covered his features. And older women are the worst about it. While clear disinterest will dissuade most young women, their mothers and grandmothers simply push their girls onto like a salesman selling an old horse. It's disgusting. He went silent, and I didn't question him further. There was no need to when I agreed with him. Although where I came from, women weren't too keen to allow their daughters to marry until they were at least 21. As soon as they hit that mark, it was a race to get them married off as quickly as possible. My mother, at least, seemed content with my intention to be a spinster. She already had grandchildren, so with that no longer a worry, she was more than pleased to brag about a doctor in the family. It was with this train of thought that we found ourselves arriving at the address of the boarding house in question and made our way down its front garden path. It was a beautiful old London house, all stone with a shingled roof. The house door stood open. A constable beside it glanced at me in surprise but made no comment as we entered. Inside, upon a couch, were seated two women, one older and one younger, with Lestrade and another officer in the room. The elder woman was insisting upon her son's innocence, but stopped as we walked into the room. Lestrade nodded at Holmes. Madame Charpentier, this is Detective Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Johanna Watson. They have been asked to assist in this case due to the victim being a foreigner. Dr. Watson is from the Red Cross Foreign Aid Office, who have been gracious enough to lend her to us. I glanced at Lestrade. The exaggeration of my importance did wonders for my ego. I would have to thank him later. Madame Charpentier hesitantly glanced me up and down, and then looked at Holmes. She apparently made her decision and held her hand out to me. I'm glad to meet you, Doctor. I'm sure your office can get this sorted out. I assure you that my son is innocent. He wouldn't abandon his crew just to get some petty revenge. I glanced at Holmes and then put on my best bedside manner, shaking her hand. I nodded. Of course, madam. We want to get this sorted as best we can. Could you please tell me your version of what happened? I was told that your son had been arrested with a murder weapon, but it didn't match what I found when I examined the body. She nodded. Mr. Drebber and his aide came to my place about 6 weeks ago. Johnny wasn't home then, you understand. They said they were working with the Belgian Relief Office and would pay me twice my asking rate to stay here. Well, I wasn't about to turn down that kind of money for 2 boarders, and I set them up with rooms and keys. Over the course of their stay here, they behaved a bit strangely, always fighting, though never loudly enough that we could actually hear what was being said, and then his behavior toward my daughter started. Disgust laced her tone, and I had an inkling of why this girl's brother would want to harm Mr. Drebber. I take that his behavior toward your daughter is what set your son at odds with Mr. Drebber? She nodded. Yes. He had been trying to court Lucy for weeks, but she's a good girl and kept telling him no. Besides, she has a sweetheart already anyway. Well, Johnny came home and saw how uncomfortable he was making Lucy and said that if I didn't kick them out, then he would. Lucy's sweetheart is a friend of his, you know, so I agreed and evicted them. Holmes interrupted. Mr. Drebber's behavior was so appalling to your son that he wanted to kick him out immediately, yet you tolerated it for nearly 6 weeks. Charpentier flushed. Well, you see, sir, it was a lot of money, and none of us can really be so brash as to say we don't need it given the current circumstances. Holmes went silent. Well, of course, madam. I put on my best smile I could muster. Still, it didn't matter after Johnny came home. As soon as he saw his sister being accosted, he got rid of them both. That would have been the end of it if that scoundrel hadn't come back. Holmes perked at this. He came back, you say? She nodded. As fast as we kicked them out, I forgot to retrieve his key. He came back at night and accosted my daughter once more, insisting that he would take her away and marry her. My Johnny came in and saw him, and he bolted. Johnny followed, then came back an hour or so later, real dejected because he lost track of him after he had gotten into a taxi. Now he's been arrested for murder. I tell you, he didn't do it. I turned to Lestrade. I believe her story. I know enough Navy men to know that Drebber would have been beaten quite near to death, but not all the way there, had he slighted them. Madame Charpentier puffed up. So you understand, then? Well, I knew I was right to trust you. You will get this sorted, won't you? Holmes spoke up. The evidence against your son is circumstantial at best, and while I do wish to speak with him first, we will likely have this settled before his ship heads out. Bless you! It was the first thing out of the younger woman's mouth. She had been sitting in miserable silence during the entire exchange, but hope now graced her delicate face. If Johnny were to go to jail because of me, I don't know how I'd bear it. Holmes glanced at Lestrade, then gave the girl a kind but firm look. Miss Charpentier, I can assure you that, should a scoundrel do to my sister what Mr. Drebber did to you, I would not hesitate to take the same actions taken by your brother. No true gentleman would. With that, we were off to the station to meet the yard's most prominent suspect, Johnny Charpentier. Lestrade informed us that an officer by the name of Gregson had taken him in that same day. This didn't surprise me. The son had been the last one to see Mr. Drebber, and was actively attempting to injure him. I was also beginning to notice that this detective work involved spending a lot of time on one's feet. Ideally, this wouldn't take too long. Lestrade came with us, and we traveled in silence, which I was more than grateful for, as I only had the fortitude to either walk or think. I could not do both at the same time. It was not a long walk, fortunately, and we made our way up the steps, only to have a man I didn't know come fuming down upon us. They found Stangerson's body in a hotel. No time to waste. Come on! Without a word, we followed, missing Holmes' opportunity to speak with Johnny. By the time we made it to the hotel, I was in quite a bit of pain. I had spent more time on my feet in the last few hours than I had in the last few weeks, but I toughed it out. I wasn't the first to serve in pain, and mine wasn't the worst case either. We were met by the concierge who had reported the death. It's quite terrible, sir. The gentleman was stabbed! Stabbed! In my hotel! Oh, is it quite all right to bring a lady to the scene? He had caught sight of me, and I gave a rueful smile. Lestrade glanced at me, then looked at the stranger Holmes had referred to as Gregson. But before either could speak, Holmes took over. This lady is Dr. Johanna Watson. She's an American surgeon who served alongside nurses of Paschadale. I assure you she is more equipped for what you are about to show us than most men. The concierge nodded. Forgive me, doctor. I waved my hand. It's quite all right. Your concern is appreciated. He nodded and led us to the room we had come to see. Stangerson lay in the middle of the room with a knife protruding from his chest. Holmes strode over and knelt down, checking to ensure the cause of death. He then rummaged through the dead man's pockets and pulled out a small piece of paper and a pocket-book. Turning the man over, he made a small exclamation of excitement. Underneath Stangerson's body was a small pill box, which he pocketed. 2 pills! Fascinating! Across the room from us, the word Rush was painted on the wall in blood, seemingly the dead man's. However, as the previous murder victim was physically unharmed, I wasn't entirely certain. As Holmes was darting around the room, examining the fallen table and chair, I began to grow weary. The activity of the day had become more than I could handle, and the pain was chipping away at my resolve. I had only set my mind to coming along, as I thought I would be needed, but given the quite obvious cause of death, I was regretting not insisting upon returning to my room. As I was about to despair, the blessed hotel manager spoke to me. As you are assisting with the investigations, miss, I'm sure you have questions for me. Perhaps we could move to my office for those. It would be far more comfortable to answer if I were not in the same room as a corpse. I blinked, then nodded. Yes, of course, that would be fine. Holmes, who had finished darting about the room, popped over and chimed in. That sounds wonderful. Lead the way. In the hotel office, the concierge offered me the use of the couch intended for interviews. I gratefully sank down onto it and off of my aching feet. I do hope you don't mind moving. I just thought it would be far more comfortable here. I smiled. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. He nodded. Mr. Holmes, I assume you would like to know everything that happened regarding Mr. Stangerson. I will tell you all that I know. This is quite an upsetting thing to happen at our hotel, and we would like to have it sorted as soon as possible. Holmes nodded. Understandable. It all started about a week ago. Mr. Stangerson came in with Mr. Drebber to book rooms. They were quite unhappy with one another. They argued the whole night. They were quite adept at keeping their voices down, but several things were heard, including something about Stangerson nearly getting himself killed over a woman and having to leave Europe since he could never manage to keep a low profile. Holmes frowned. Did you hear all of this yourself? The concierge shook his head. Gossip spreads through the employees like wildfire, I'm afraid. I don't discourage it, as it is all the easier to protect my maids from incidents with less than gentlemanly patrons. Holmes nodded. Carry on then. Well, Mr. Drebber left in the night, and it didn't come back for several days. I must say, you've managed to do a fine job keeping it out of the papers. I snorted. The atrocities of the Germans have done most of the work there. Both men glanced down at me. Yes, that would seem to be the case. The concierge seemed hesitant. At any rate, we didn't know that he was killed, only that he had disappeared. Mr. Stangerson spent most of his time out looking for him. I do remember him saying that they didn't have time for this and needed to head to South America. Holmes pulled a paper out of his pocket and held it out to me. Taking it, I found it was a telegram reading, J.H. is in Europe. Meanwhile, the concierge continued speaking. That's how it's been all week until last night. Mr. Stangerson came in with being supported by a cabby, muttering about Mr. Drebber. I told the cabby which room he had, and the cabby took him up. The body wasn't discovered until today, when the maid went in to clean the room, assuming he had left like he had all week. It gave her a violent scare. He shook his head as if attempting to rid the memory from his own mind. I made certain that she didn't touch anything, and we called for the police. Did you see the cabby leave the hotel? I glanced at Holmes in surprise. What did that matter? The concierge shook his head. No, sir, I left the front desk for about half an hour after they came in. I'm quite certain he left, though, as the night man never mentioned a cabby leaving the hotel when he reported to me. Holmes nodded. Thank you. I believe that is about all we will need. Holding out his hand to me, he turned to Lestrade. You need to release Mr. Charpentier. He didn't murder Mr. Drebber. Lestrade huffed. And if he didn't, who did? Come with me, and I will tell you. Holmes led the way back to his household's estate, and upon arriving I made my way to my favorite chair, fully intent on standing no more. That was one perk to being female. Gregson came up to me as Holmes rushed out for a few minutes, stating that he had to call for something. I'm sorry about him. He forgets that some people aren't healthy enough for these kinds of things. I gave a wry smile. If my pain is that obvious, you'd think he would have noticed. He shook his head. It's not relevant to the case at hand, so it doesn't make an impression. I shrugged, unconcerned with any implied rudeness. It's not entirely his fault. I was too stubborn to insist upon returning home. I'm afraid it's a bad habit. Gregson grinned. Stubbornness can get you into a lot of places. It's just too bad they're not always good ones. I gave a laugh. That's true. It is what got me into Europe, at any rate. I wanted to ask, what on earth possessed an American lady to come serve in a European war? Surely they could have made use of you in the States. Gregson! Lestrade made as if to scold him, but I waved him off. It's fine, Lestrade. It's a natural curiosity. Besides, the answer is simply that I don't like not being of use to those who need to be served the most. I felt like I was needed in Belgium far more than in the States, and I had the connections to make it happen. I really don't see myself as sacrificing any more than the nurses I served with either. The Queen Alexandra Corps are wonderful women. Lestrade frowned. I suppose that's an acceptable answer, but why don't you return to the States? I shook my head. The journey would be hard on my body, and the submarine warfare frightens my uncle. His opinion is that at least here there are bomb shelters and countryside to run to. Actually, if it weren't for my insisting I aid the Red Cross heads, I would be there now. He's terrified of my taking a boat and it getting torpedoed, which I suppose is valid. Holmes returned, carrying an old terrier that was near death. The poor thing was quite ancient, and I was surprised I hadn't seen it before. Mrs. Hudson followed behind him, looking quite sober, with a glass of steaming milk. Holmes placed the dog before the fire and began to speak. Now then, if I am correct, then this, he pulled the small pill-box from his pocket, contains the poison that killed Mr. Drebber. He opened the box, which contained 2 small white tablets. He placed one in a saucer and crushed it with a small glass nearby, then poured it into some of the warm milk Mrs. Hudson had brought in, who sat on the floor by the dog and began to stroke its back. Holmes placed the dish in front of the dog, and it gamely lapped up all the milk. Then we waited. We waited for naught, as 15 minutes later the dog was fine. Mrs. Hudson glanced at Holmes, who looked confused before turning once more to the pill-box. "It can't be, unless—" He muttered these words as he pulled away the other dish and repeated the previous process with the other pill. Once again the dog lapped up the milk, but this time the dog swiftly closed its eyes, shivered, and gave up the ghost. Holmes had a considering look on his face, while Lestrade and Gregson stood confused. Only one of the pills was poisoned. Why would someone do that except to play a twisted version of Russian roulette? All of the men turned to me. "How do you know what Russian roulette is?" Lestrade was clearly dumbfounded. I had a brother that liked to teach his siblings inappropriate games. He would put a bunch of identical cans onto a spinning table and covered them with a sheet and spin them round. Most were empty. One was full of worms. The 3 gentlemen in the room looked disgusted at this explanation, but Mrs. Hudson actually laughed. "Sounds about right for a little boy." I decided not to mention that the brother in question had been 16 at that point. Holmes shook his head. "I do believe you may have a point, Watson. About Russian roulette?" He nodded. "Rather something like it. The killer was likely playing some kind of game with his victims. Stangerson refused to play and was stabbed instead. Whatever the point of the game was, vengeance was part of it." Gregson looked like he was about to ask a question when there was a knock on the door. A little boy of about 10 came inside. "We've found the cabby you asked for, sir." Holmes smiled. "Very good, William. Please ask him to come assist me with my luggage. I've far too much to bring it out on my own." William seemed to be the only one unfazed by this odd request, and he ran back out the door. "Going on a trip, are you?" Lestrade's sarcasm was evident. "It does look that way, doesn't it? Gregson, your handcuffs, please." Gregson was clearly puzzled, but turned his handcuffs over to Holmes, who slipped them into his coat sleeve. He pulled a large suitcase, seemingly from nowhere, and then there was a knock at the door. A large cabman came in, and Holmes, who was seemingly entranced by a paper on the desk, pointed at the suitcase. "It's there. Do take it down, please." The cabman said nothing and bent down to take the suitcase, but as he laid his hands on it, Holmes slipped cuffs onto his wrists. "Sir, you are under arrest. Gregson, Lestrade, this is your murderer, Mr. Jefferson Hope."